Hey guys, so it's time to start a new unit. We're starting the energy unit. I call this unit 4, and I know we haven't done unit 3 yet, but I think we can get through this unit really quick. And it's okay to do 4 before 3 or 3 before 4. So we're doing 4. And this is all about energy. And if you look at the outline that we have for this, the outline consists of just an introduction to metabolism. And we're going to be even doing some math. Yes, you math haters out there, I know you're not going to like that. But it's real simple addition, subtraction kind of stuff. We're going to be doing some math with the Gibbs free energy equation. Then, and it's going to take me a couple of videos probably to get through this and all. But I did print out my notes ahead of time, or I copied them up ahead of time so you can take a look at them. But I am going to be filling in some definitions, so you want to follow along definitely with this. Okay. And this first set of videos is going to cover Roman numeral 1, which is all about metabolism, Gibbs free energy equation, all that stuff. In the next section, I'll be talking about ATP and then finally enzymes. With our final of this unit is photosynthesis and respiration. Okay, so here's where we're going to just touch on this lightly, not go into a lot of detail about this, focus on a few things. I know you remember maybe KB's big paper doing this in the past, or acting this out. We're going to try and eliminate some of that stuff to get to at least the bones of this, the big picture of all of this. Okay, so that's where we're going with this unit. It's on energy, and we will be doing a couple of labs, one on photosynthesis, one on respiration with this unit too. All right, so let's get started with our intro to metabolism. This follows along with your outline, and here we go. Okay, so we're going to start off, and it's a lot of terminology here, so bear with me having to say these words. And the first one is bioenergetics. And bioenergetics is the study of energy flow through living things, of energy flow through living things. Okay, so it's funny, I should title this unit actually bioenergetics, but I don't because, it is on energy and we want to kind of say that word for you. Okay. All right. So the next word that we need to define, since we're talking about metabolism, is what is metabolism? So we look at this first definition and it says the totality of an organism's chemical reactions. Okay. It's all the reactions that are going on inside of an organism. And I know you've heard people say, oh, I have a high metabolism or I have a low metabolism. That's basically saying, are your reactions happening fast or slow? Okay. And yes, our genetics do kind of dictate how fast or slow they go. So just like we have different heights for people, well, we have different metabolisms. It's just another genetic quality of us. But what I like to add to this definition is I like to add it's the web. It's like the web of all your chemical reactions. Okay. So it's a web of thousands of chemical reactions and that's within an organism. I'm just going to end it with chemical reactions, thousands of chemical reactions. And in each of these reactions, some will kind of intersect. So it's almost like a food web. You know how if you do a food chain, grass gets eaten by the grasshopper, which gets eaten by a bird, which gets eaten by a snake, which gets eaten by a hawk. But wait, something else can eat the grasshopper, maybe like a little mole or something like that. And a cat can come along and eat that mole or something. So it's like a food web where there's intersections and branches off of it. It's not just a straight pathway, the chemical reactions. It's not like this is for this and this is this. It's all interacting. So when we talk about the metabolism, it really is more like a food web, but it's more like a chemical web, chemical reaction web. Okay. Now, just like food webs have food chains, well, metabolism has different metabolic pathways. And this is like a series of steps. And let me add to this a series of steps that begins with a specific molecule, which is then altered, sometimes many times altered to a product that the body needs to do something. We're going to look at a bunch of different metabolic pathways, but we're kind of getting just the gist of everything down. Now, we have this little schematic here that kind of shows a metabolic pathway, but in very simple terms. Here's your starting reactant, which is A, which needs to be converted to B. B is just like a different shape, maybe. It's maybe an entirely different molecule. It could be just an isomer of the original one. But in between A and B is where the reaction is going to happen. That's the metabolic pathway. The whole thing is metabolic pathway. This is just one reaction. And it would be controlled by one enzyme. When B gets converted to C, then there's another enzyme 2. So this is another enzyme 2 with a second reaction 2. And then if C needs to be converted to D, because say D is what you want, there's still yet another enzyme and another reaction. Okay. And some metabolic pathways have like hundreds of steps to them. And it's actually quite amazing. I have a poster in my classroom that I always like to show that shows all kinds of different metabolic pathways that are in living things. And, to look at it, you'd be overwhelmed. But when you get into college, especially grad work, you might study one specific metabolic pathway. I know a teacher here had a friend who was getting her dissertation and, her PhD and defending her thesis. And her thesis was actually on the metabolic pathway for concussions. And she was showing how this pathway is interrupted through concussions, which then can lead to many people studying this and designing drugs to help people recover from those things much sooner. So it's kind of interesting. All right. So the next thing is metabolic pathways come in like two types of metabolic pathways. And here they are, catabolic and anabolic. And I always say cat scratches and tears things apart. Well, a catabolic reaction releases energy by breaking something down. Releases energy by breaking down. So an example of a catabolic reaction could be like digestion. Okay. It could also be cellular respiration, which breaks down glucose and extracts energy out of it to form ATPs. Okay, that's a good thing in this one. Okay, then anabolic reactions, well, they would be the opposite. So if this releases energy, this absorbs energy or consumes energy, we'll say consumes energy. And if this was by breaking down, this is by building up. And you can think of an example of that, and to be on the opposite side of this, you could say like amino acids forming a protein, right? Monomers forming polymers. So we'll say amino acids forming, and I just put AA for amino acids forming proteins. But the other one that I like to talk about that's anabolic, what's usually something we talk about opposite cellular respiration? Yeah, wait for it. Photosynthesis. Okay. Photosynthesis actually has to take in energy, right? And so it consumes energy. That's the energy from sunlight. And it builds up. What does it build up? It also takes in carbon dioxide and water and builds up and makes glucose out of it. Okay, sugars out of it. So that's a definite anabolic reaction. Okay, so let's get into, so that's a few terms to start this unit off. And now let's get into actually energy. Now, you'll see that I left this kind of blank. Energy is the capacity to, and so often people always say to do work. Okay, well, when you're in a physics class, yeah, they're going to talk about how energy is the capacity to do work and all. But I want you, what happened to my, little camera here. Okay, you're still there. Okay. I want you to think of it a different way. I want you to think of it as the capacity to cause change. Cause change. Okay. And again, that goes back to the metabolic pathway because when we think of living organisms, we think of just like changing, changing, changing. We're not always thinking of the work, but that does come into play. We're always thinking of the change that's being caused. Okay. And life, this is a very important statement here, very important statement when I put a little asterisk like that. Life depends on a cell's ability to transform energy, to change. Remember, this means change energy from like one form to another. Okay, so and change substances from one form to another. So energy, I really want you to think of it as the capacity to cause change. Energy causes change. Okay, and two types, you've heard of these before: kinetic and potential. Now, so often people think kinetic is motion, right? All right, I'll write it motion. Okay. But I don't want you to think of, there's that proverbial diagram where there's the rock sitting on the hill. And the rock, when it's sitting at the top of the hill, you say, oh, it's got potential because it's by position, right? And then as it's rolling down, oh, now it's like releasing kinetic energy. That's good for physics. But what about in biology? What do we care about when it comes to kinetic energy here? It's the motion of atoms and electrons of those atoms more specifically, but we'll just say the motion of atoms, okay? So I want you to think, when we think of forms of kinetic energy, I want you to think of two examples. In biology, we're always mentioning heat and light, okay? Heat and light are two very important kinetic energy sources when it comes to biology. Potential, I know you want to think about like position, or it's stored energy, right? But I want you to think of it as, yes, it's the energy possessed due to a location, but also of structure too. So it's energy of location or structure. And in biology, we're going to focus on the structure more, okay? I want you to think bonds, not James bonds. I want you to think chemical bonds. So in biology, it's bonds that store energy, that have a lot of potential energy, okay? So think of those things in biology all the time. Whenever we're talking about kinetic energy, it's usually going to be light or heat. And whenever we're talking about potential energy, it's energy that's in the bonds of things, okay? And those bonds will get broken and remade, all right? So I think I'm going to end maybe this right now and go on to the next thing with the next video, okay?